Hi, now we are going to learn function overloading. Function overloading is something which is an extension of functions, and this comes with the object-oriented programming. So in the earlier class you have learnt about functions and you know how to write functions. We know that whenever we have to do a specific task, we write a function, and that function can be called from any other function in the program and any number of times. So functions are something which reduces our programming effort and increases the speed of the program. It also reduces the number of lines in our code. So when we look at function overloading, it refers to writing a function with the same name but with different definitions. So this means that we have many versions of the same functions, but we have to understand that all these functions will be working differently. So in function overloading, the parameters that are passed to the function will be different. So the name of the function will be the same, but the parameter list will be different. So if you find a program in which there is a function written more than once, in that case you have to check the parameter list. If the parameter list of those functions are different, then it is a case of function overloading. Now, as I said, function overloading comes under the object-oriented programming, and this implements the feature of polymorphism in OOPS. And this function overloading makes the program run faster than the normal functions. The signature of a function refers to the argument list which is passed along with the function. So overloaded functions may be having the same name. In fact, they should have the same name, but they should have different arguments list. So that is compulsory. I mean, if you pass the same argument list, then the compiler will not compile the program. It will result in a compilation error. So we have to make sure that the signature of the function has to be different. That is the argument list. Now let's look at this prototypes of the overloaded function. I'm going to write a function void add, which is having 6 versions over here. Void add int a1 comma a2, void add int a1 comma float a2, void add float a1 comma int a2, void add with no parameters, void add int a1 comma int a2 comma int a3, void add float a1 comma float a2 comma float a3. So here you can see that all the functions has different arguments list. The second and the third, if you look at that, the second one has integer first and float second, and the third one has float first and integer as the second parameter. So there again there is a difference in the sequence in which I have written the parameters. So they are different. So here the name of the function is add, it's the same, but the signature of the function is all different. So this is a case of function overloading, and this is the way you write the prototypes of the overloaded functions. Now let's move on to calling overloaded functions, how to call the overloaded functions. The overloaded functions can be called from anywhere in the program. Here I am going to show you how it is to be called from the main method. If I write something like add 10 comma 12, here I am passing 2 integer variables to the add functions. So the overloaded function void add int a1 comma int a2 will be called. So the compiler looks at 2 integer arguments and selects the overloaded function which has 2 integer arguments and executes that. If I put something like add 10.34, 34.34, 56.5, then the function with 3 float parameters will be called, because I'm passing 3 decimal numbers as the arguments. So in function overloading, the compiler looks for the correct set of parameters in the overloaded functions and executes that. So the programmer has to take care that all the versions of the overloaded functions have been written correctly, so that the compiler doesn't encounter any error while calling those functions. This is a small example of function overloading. Here I have written 2 overloaded functions, void add int a1 comma int a2 and void add int a1 comma int a2 comma int a3. In the main function, I am asking the user to enter 3 numbers, and 3 numbers have been accepted in the variables num1, num2 and num3. Then we have given cout, different calls to the overloaded function. Now I am going to call the overloaded functions. Add num1 comma num2 comma num3. This is the first call to the overloaded function. This will look for a version of the add method in which I have 3 integer variables. So if you look at the prototypes that we have given above, there is one version of the add method in which I have int a1 comma int a2 comma int a3. So that version will be called and executed. Second, I am writing add num1 comma num2. In this there are 2 integer variables. So the compiler will select that function which has 2 integer variables, int a1 comma int a2. So for both the calls, there is one version of the overloaded function which can be called and executed by the compiler. Now the definitions of those functions: void add int a1 comma int a2 comma int a3. Here I am finding out the sum of all the 3 variables and printing them out. Similarly, void add int a1 comma int a2. Here I am adding the 2 numbers a1 and a2 and printing their sum. So this is a program which can add either 2 numbers or 3 numbers depending on what the user passes to the add function. So here we have illustrated the usage of function overloading and how to write a program using function overloading. Now let's try to understand what are default arguments. Most of the times people compare default arguments with function overloading because the calling code looks almost the same, but there is a difference between default arguments and function overloading. Let's see how. If we write a function void volume int length comma int breadth is equal to 10, int height is equal to 5. Now in this function you can see I have written int breadth is equal to 10 and int height is equal to 5. Now this means that if the user doesn't provide any value for breadth, then the value 10 will be taken, and if the user doesn't provide any value for height, then the value 5 will be taken. So there are 3 variables, length, breadth and height, and the user has the option of passing either all the 3 variables or just 2 variables or even 1 variable. Let's see how. This function can be called in different ways. So the first one is volume 10, 20, 30. So here I'm passing all the three arguments. So 10 will be taken for length, 20 for breadth and 30 for height. Supposing I give only volume 10, 20. In that case 10 is length, 20 is breadth, and since nothing is being given for height, then the default value will be taken. In the third case, I'm writing volume 10. So here we are passing the values only for length and not for breadth and height. So in this case, for breadth and height, that is for both the variables, the default values will be taken and the volume will be computed. Look at this example. I have written one program. A prototype is given, void calculate commission, calc_com, int a1, int a2 is equal to 2. In the main function, we are writing int num1 is equal to 15,400, int num2 is equal to 5. So we are taking two variables and giving values for them. Now I'm calling the calculate commission num1, num2. In this case I'm passing both num1 and num2. So num1 is taken as 15,400 and num2 is taken as 5, and the commission is calculated. In the second case I am writing calc_com num1. So now here I am passing just one variable. There is only one function called calculate commission. It goes to that function. It passes the value of num1 to the first variable. Since there is no value being passed for the second one, the default value is taken for the second variable. So the second variable becomes 2. So in this case the commission is calculated with the values 15,402. So here you can see that there is no function overloading as such, but I am only providing default values so that the function can be called in different ways. But we haven't written that calc_com more than once. It is only once. So it's not a case of function overloading. So you need to understand the difference between function overloading and default arguments. Both of them are used effectively by programmers, so whatever the situation demands, accordingly they have to be used. So we have discussed function overloading, what is function overloading and how to use function overloading. We have also seen an example of function overloading, and we have also learned what are default arguments and the difference between default arguments and function overloading. With that, I come to the end of this topic. I hope you have understood function overloading. Thank you.